Well, it would take more than a year, but Alec Murdoch is now facing a jury trial, accused of murdering his wife and his son. Was Maggie Murdoch lured to the site of her murder? Or did this poor woman just stumble upon the murder of her son, only to be silenced by gunfire? Welcome to Profiling Evil, everybody. This is the weekly crime recap, and I hope you'll hit that like and subscribe button. You know, it didn't take the grand jury very long to bind Alex Murdoch over for allegedly committing 2 counts of murder. The victims? They were his wife and one of his sons. And the big question on my mind is whether the prosecutor is going to pursue the death penalty or not. Well, if you're like me, you've been watching this case unfold from the beginning, and I thought I might just retrace a few of the highlights, and then let's jump into some comments and predictions along the way that I made during closing arguments on Court TV with Vinnie Politan. I want to start, though, by going back to about 1920. It was that long ago, 100 years ago. The Murdoch family started serving as one of South Carolina's solicitors. Now, a solicitor is like a district attorney. That tradition carried on from generation to generation. And frankly, the fact that they sat in the top prosecuting job really has a bunch of people talking about this thing. And even more, throwing out conspiracy theories about what went on. Well, we're going to start off this story starting on July 8th, 2015, because that's when things really start getting interesting in the Murdoch saga. That was the day that a 19-year-old man named Stephen Smith was discovered dead along the roadside of Sandy Run Road in Hampton County. Now, the case was eventually ruled a hit-and-run traffic accident, but Smith's mother, she never stopped thinking this was a murder. And now, new interest in the case is starting to kind of swing in her direction. And you might guess this, but the Murdoch family is somehow playing into the story. Now, I hope you'll take a moment, study Stephen Smith's case, and weigh in below on what you think happened in the death investigation and what it was about his lifestyle that might have triggered this kind of a reaction. Now we're going to roll over just a short time later, 3 years is all, when a mysterious injury happens at the Murdoch home to their housekeeper, a woman named Gloria Satterfield. It was on February 2nd, 2018, when Miss Satterfield had a slip and fall accident just outside the Murdoch home on the steps. I'm still troubled when I listen to that 911 call, especially the part where the 911 dispatcher asks if she's checked the bleeding head wound, to which Mrs. Murdoch says no. Well, listen to this call in its entirety.
911, where's your emergency?
My housekeeper has fallen and her head is bleeding. I cannot get her up. She fell going up the steps, up the brick steps.
Is she bleeding from anywhere?
Yes, her head.
Okay, are you guys able to control the bleeding?
No,
Can you
I
put
haven't
a
even
clean
tried.
rag or anything on it?
Yeah, I got it.
Okay, is she bleeding from, like, her face, the back of the head,
I've got
her
an
neck?
ambulance coming. Sir, ma'am, what?
Where exactly is she bleeding from on her head?
I'm not sure. At the top of her head.
Okay.
Hello?
Yeah, can you ask the patient what kind of pain she's having?
Ma'am, she can't talk.
Okay, do you know...
She's cracked her head and there's blood on the concrete and she's bleeding out of her left ear.
Okay, she's bleeding out of her ear?
And out of her head. She's cracked her skull.
Okay. All right, the other lady said that she had tried to stand up and fell down again?
No, I was holding her up. And
Okay.
she told me to turn her loose and she was trying to use her arm, but then she fell back over.
Okay, do you guys know who she is?
Yes, she works for us.
Okay, do you know if she's ever had a stroke or anything before?
Ma'am, can you stop asking her these questions?
I already have them on the way. Me asking questions does not slow them down in any way. These are relevant questions that I have to ask for the ambulance. One of my questions is, has she ever had a stroke?
I don't believe she's ever had a stroke, now that I know that.
Okay. Okay, is she able to talk to you guys at all, or is she unconscious now?
She's not unconscious. She's just mumbling.
Okay.
I believe she's maybe hit her head and maybe has a concussion or something.
Okay.
Maybe.
Do you know what her name is?
Gloria Satterfield.
Well, make sure you're digging into that case too, folks. I think you're going to be really concerned as you see Mrs. Satterfield's condition worsen. She dies just a few weeks later on February 26th. And here's something that really bugs me about that particular incident. Reportedly, Alex Murdoch notified the Satterfield family that he would represent them in a personal injury lawsuit against himself. That's right. You can't make this stuff up. This is the way it happened. He apparently collected and paid the family a small settlement, but now it's being reported that he actually kept millions of dollars that rightfully was theirs. This entire family seems pretty darn dysfunctional, and new information is coming out that suggests that Murdoch had an opioid addiction and he was involved in some illegal drug trafficking. Don't know if it's true or not. That's going to come out in all the trials. But about this same time that Satterfield dies, actually about a year later, the Murdoch son, Paul, decides to go boating and partying with a bunch of friends. He purchases alcohol, and reportedly several of the kids, including Paul, became deeply intoxicated. As Paul raced the Murdoch family boat near a place called Paris Island, he lost control and struck a bridge abutment. The crash was so violent that most of the occupants were thrown around, including Mallory Beach, a young woman who was thrown overboard. They looked for her, but they couldn't find her. You know, it would take nearly a week before searchers found her deceased body in a marsh downstream. Yet while her lifeless body was floating away, Alex Murdoch was ensuring his son wouldn't go to jail, and he attempted to ensure the testimony of the others on the boat wouldn't lead to the conviction of his son. Paul was bound over for court for Mallory's death, and the Mallory Beach family reportedly filed lawsuits against the Murdochs. But before Paul could be tried for boating under the influence and causing great bodily injury, that's a serious crime, another tragedy struck the Murdoch family. And this one might have included a great deal of planning, perhaps even premeditation. It was June 7th, 2021 at 10:07 p.m. when Alex Murdoch called the Colton County Dispatch Center to report that he just discovered the murdered bodies of his wife, Maggie, and his son, Paul. They were laying outside of his 1,770-acre lodge, his kennels, as he would call it, dead by gunshot wounds. Let's listen to a portion of that 911 call.
911, where's your emergency?
This is Alex Murdoch at 4147 Moselle Road. I need the police to ambulance immediately. My wife and child just shot badly.
Okay, you said 4147 Moselle Road in Allison?
Sir?
You said 4147 Moselle Road in Allison?
Yes, sir. 4147 Moselle Road.
Stay on the line with me, okay? Yes, sir. Stay on the line with me, okay? Okay.
Colin County Communications.
Collison, I have an Alex Murdoch on the line, caller from 4147 Moselle Road. He's advising that his wife and child was shot.
Okay, and are they breathing?
No, ma'am.
Okay, and you said it's your wife and your son?
My wife and my son.
Are they in a vehicle?
No, ma'am. They're on the ground out at my kennels.
Okay, what is her name?
Maggie and Paul.
And you sure they're not breathing? Is he moving at all, your son? I know you said that she was shot, but what about your son?
Nobody. They're not. Neither one of them moving.
I don't want you to touch them at all, okay? I don't know if you've already touched them, but I don't want you to touch them just in case they can get any kind of evidence, okay?
I'd already touched them trying to get to see if they were breathing.
Well, interestingly, a day later, police confirmed that the death of Maggie and Paul was in fact a homicide. But the police stopped short of announcing that there was a killer on the loose. Instead, they quietly began building their case, including collecting evidence that now appears to originate with Alex Murdoch. Vinnie Paulton asked me what I thought about some of the evidence that was rolling out in this case, and we discussed it in detail. But I want to just take a moment and listen to a little bit of that conversation.
All right, Charlie, I want to bring in, joining us in Salt Lake City, Utah, retired police commander, host of the Profiling Evil podcast, Mike King is with us. Mike, I wanted to bring you in tonight to give your initial impressions of some of this potential evidence in the case. Let's start with the fact that she was lured there. If we're hearing that they have evidence that she was lured there, how would you be able to potentially prove that in court?
Yeah, that's going to be really something to follow, isn't it? It's going to be whether it was a text message or a phone call that was made, just something that shows and is forensically going to identify one phone going to another to get there, who made that call, what led her, what is the cell phone data on her and her vehicle, what's the GPS data going to say about when she left and started over in that to that kennel. In the same case for Murdoch, what time did he leave his parents' home? We're going to have to kind of mash all that together against this forensic evidence that the coroners come down with. The somewhere between 9 and 9:30 is the time of death. It's not till 10:07 when the call for service comes in of the 911 call. And so that hour is still pretty dang short, even with all of the testimony. But man, the GPS data off of Murdoch's vehicle is going to be huge and key. Who owns the weapon? Where did the weapon originate? What was the skill level? When we start looking at some of that other physical evidence, the high velocity blood spatter, all of that, I think Vinny is going to really paint a picture. But, you know, when I look at this one, I think there was a target, and I think the second victim, whether it was Maggie or Paul, that second one was just cleaning up the mess, just getting rid of the witness.
One final question, Mike. We're a little short on time tonight. The cell phone data in an area like that in the Low Country where we see things are very spread out. I mean, the murders, the property was 1,700 acres that they had. Will that be a challenge in trying to pinpoint where cell phones are at certain times?
So it could be a challenge. And I looked at the location of all the cell towers in the area, and there are two towers that are probably closest to that location. One's 8.5 miles away. The other one's 8 3/4 of a mile away. But if there's Wi-Fi on the property and his phone automatically would pick up that Wi-Fi, that could really improve the accuracy, because what it boils down to, Vinny, is triangulating between the three most powerful signals on the cell phone system to determine where that vehicle is. But nowadays, we can go back and we can actually query the device itself and say, hey, what did the device say the GPS location was? So I think they're going to have a whole lot more information than we used to think they could get in these kinds of cases.
Unbelievable. The digital footprint has become the fingerprint of our time. Mike King,
it's amazing.
Great to see you. Check out his podcast, Profiling Evil, on YouTube. Great to see you, Mike. When we come back, folks.
Well, within a few days of that homicide, a graveyard memorial service was held for Paul and Maggie. About that time, a little bit after, the Colton County coroner confirmed that both Maggie and Paul had died from multiple gunshot wounds. What we've learned since then is Maggie died from the result of a gunshot wound from a high-power rifle, while Paul, he died because of a shotgun blast. The time of death is estimated to be about 9 o'clock to 9:30 at night. And this is really important because think about it. Alex Murdoch called 911 at 10:07. This means that Paul and Maggie died about 30 to 67 minutes before Alex Murdoch made that 911 call reporting the crime. Now, the months started ticking away. But each month was filled with twists, turns, and unexpected surprises. Surprises like when SLED, South Carolina's law enforcement division, reopened the death investigation of Stephen Smith. Their question? Maybe this wasn't an accident. Maybe it was homicide. Also, Paul Murdoch's case, the one for causing the death of Mallory Beach, that was dropped by the South Carolina Attorney General's office because, frankly, Paul was dead. Then, about this same time, more information starts coming out about Alex Murdoch. He's fired from his own law firm, the family law firm, after they discovered that he allegedly had stolen millions of dollars from the firm. Now, the following day, another bizarre crime against the Murdoch family happens, but this time it's Alex Murdoch who claims he's the victim. Murdoch dials 911 and reports. Murdoch ends up in a hospital claiming he was shot in the head by a passerby while he was changing a tire on a dusty back road. At the time, a spokesman representing Murdoch released a statement saying Alex Murdoch's shooting was not self-inflicted. At about that same time, Alex Murdoch's attorneys announced that he'd been battling an opioid addiction for about 20 years. And of course, it's about this same time that Murdoch confesses that he made up the attempted murder on his life case, says that the shooter was actually an extended family member. And that family member was in cahoots with him to get an insurance scam that hoped to give his other son, the only surviving son, a $10 million death benefit upon the untimely death of Alex Murdoch. Well, it didn't happen. It only took a couple of days for the co-conspirator to announce that he'd been set up by Alex Murdoch. Well, over the course of the many months that followed, more and more information about fraud and fraud cases came out. Murdoch was charged with enough financial crimes to eventually put him in prison for more than 700 years if he's convicted. Then, law enforcement opened up the Gloria Satterfield slip and fall case at the Murdoch home. Now, you remember that? It was reported as an accident, fell on the steps. But this time, they're investigating the case as if it were a homicide, and Alex Murdoch is the prime suspect. The case churned along in the late months of 2021 and the early months of 2022, with civil cases coming and going, some being settled, some still in the works. But the big news happened this week when prosecutors presented a homicide case to a grand jury. And that grand jury, it took fewer than 2 hours to determine there was enough probable cause to hold Alex Murdoch over for the murder of his wife, Maggie, and his son, Paul. Now, during my appearance on Court TV, I suggested that the murder of Maggie and Paul was going to show some really interesting criminal behavior. I believe we're going to see that there's a great deal of premeditation and planning that went into their deaths, at least into Maggie's death. Because if media reports are correct, they're saying that she was lured to the kennels. I would suggest that she, in fact, was the primary victim, the person that this killer wanted to kill. And that killer is allegedly her husband, Alex Murdoch. The shooter certainly, I don't think, knew, but Paul was there. Perhaps he rode with Maggie to the scene, or maybe he had been there already, but once she's murdered, he runs to her side, probably after hearing the shot that killed her. And it was there that he probably saw the killer. And more importantly, the killer saw him, a witness that needed to be eliminated. So, what do you think happened, folks? I mean, who, in your opinion, is the intended victim in this case? And why would the killer want that person dead? I'm going to be looking for your answers down below, but I hope you'll take time to read each other's, respond to each other, and then share your theories on what happens. We'll see how it fits in as this case unfolds. Now, with all that wacky news, did you hear the amazing news of the 6-year-old boy who was discovered 23 years ago in a shallow grave on the edge of a small cemetery in Georgia? The discovery of the unknown child impacted the community deeply. And while no one could figure out who the child was or what family he came from, he touched the community. And frankly, I was touched by the impact he had then and now. I was especially touched by the way the ecumenical community came together and offered up a beautiful memorial service for this child, giving him a burial and a grave with no name on the headstone. Let's watch.
Unnamed but not unknown. Those who gathered for the service for the little boy said it may seem no one knows the child whose remains were found in a cemetery 3 weeks ago, but God knows.
For indeed God Almighty knows this unknown, unnamed creation of His.
The service brought together people of all faiths, all sharing a common concern for this child. So many people were touched not only by the death, but by the fact that no one has come forward to claim the little boy.
Well, I cried. It was just so sad to think that somebody would give birth to a child and not miss it.
The service comes a day after investigators put together a clay reconstruction of the child's face. Perhaps this will help jar someone's memory and answer the multitude of questions. Till then, this blank headstone will be placed in the cemetery where the child's body was found. These folks hope to one day inscribe a name.
The years passed slowly, and law enforcement was unable to turn any leads into something actionable. That was until last week when Georgia officials located the child's mother and subsequently gave the world this child's name, William Deshaun Hamilton Black. And as the good news reached us, the name of his alleged killer was also released. Sadly, the killer was the one entrusted with his care, his mother. There is so much more we're learning about this case, beginning with the charges that the killer now faces. 2 counts of felony murder. And by the way, 2 counts of cruelty to children, aggravated assault, and concealing the death of another. Now, the reason this is so intriguing to me is that I'm only aware of little William. Who represents the other count, and where's that count coming from? Was there a sibling? It would seem to me that there was. 2 counts, but only 1 little body recovered. There's a lot more coming down the pike on this case, folks, and I'm going to be watching this one closely. But what are your thoughts on this? You see, the indictment alleges she caused the death of her son by giving him a substance. In basic terms, she gave him antihistamines like Benadryl and pain relievers like Tylenol. Clearly, the little tyke probably was suffering from a really bad cold and subsequently died. But there's another reason to explain why he died, because his mother is also charged with physical abuse for the blunt force trauma that was discovered on the child's skull. Now, in the autopsy, you can tell whether that happened before the child died or after the child died. So I doubt that this was an artifact of burying that child. The Cobb County attorney said that for too long, this precious little boy had no name, no story. She went on to say, through the tireless efforts of several individuals and organizations who were determined not to let this boy be forgotten, William has been identified and justice will be served in his memory. Now, that's the amazing part of this story. The biggest tip in the case came from a citizen detective, someone who knew this child and knew that he disappeared, someone who refused to stop looking for the child. It's a woman who cared for William for many years, and because she was so troubled about his disappearance, she continued to look and look and look until she came across an image on the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children website. Immediately, she knew it was William. NCMEC's staff, National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, congratulated this person, saying, quote, for more than 2 decades, a woman in Charlotte who knew William and his mother followed her gut feeling that something wasn't right, and she kept looking for him, close quote. Well, in fact, she continued on and she said, we're grateful she never stopped looking until she found a rendering of William online and gave investigators the missing piece to solve this 23-year-old mystery, close quote. Let's watch just a few minutes of that press conference where DeKalb County Attorney Sherry Boston announces who William is and the indictment against William's mother.
On February 26 of 1999, the remains of a young child were found in a small wooded area at the corner of Clifton Springs Road and Clifton Spring Church Road near a cemetery. The child's body was badly decomposed, making him unrecognizable and unidentifiable. After an autopsy, the DeKalb County Medical Examiner's Office was able to conclude that the remains belong to an African American child between the ages of 5 and 7. It was estimated that he had been deceased for 3 to 6 months prior to being found. Exactly who was this child and what happened to him? Those are the questions that would resonate throughout the years. Today, John Clifton Doe has been identified as William Deshaun Hamilton, a 6-year-old child from Charlotte, North Carolina, who had recently relocated to Atlanta with his mother shortly before his death. On June 28th of 2022, a DeKalb County grand jury returned an indictment against Black on charges of felony murder, aggravated assault, cruelty to children, and concealing the death of another in connection with the death of young William. Defendant Black was arrested on June 29th of 2022 in Phoenix, Arizona, where she resides.
Well, now William's going to have his name carved on the marker that sat on his grave since he was discovered so many decades ago. Folks, make sure you're hitting the like and subscribe button and ring that bell. Thanks for supporting Profiling Evil. If you're ringing the bell and you're subscribing, you're going to get all of our videos and you'll stay up to date on things. And I hope you'll consider supporting us financially through joining our channel memberships. My personal favorite is the Academy level, where you get all kinds of information ahead of everyone else on special topics. Thanks again for all your support, and we'll see you soon at the next crime scene.